These guys, one thing I love about them too, is that they're really easy to condition to eating. What's crack-a-lackin', guys? It's Collin and Bluey in this week's all-new video, Blue Tongue Skink General Care. So, Blue Tongue Skinks, these guys comprise the genus Taliquus, which is the Australasian genus of lizards. So it's one of the largest members of the skink family. So these guys are not the largest, but they do get decently large. So as far as general size for blue tongue skinks, they're gonna generally vary in size anywhere from 18 to 24 inches in length as an adult. This will vary slightly across subspecies in the genus, but in general, 18 to 24 inches is gonna be average for these guys. As far as distribution in the wild, these guys are spread over a very vast area. So these guys are found in northern Australia, all the way up into Indonesia. So that's that island archipelago above Australia, of course. So these guys are gonna be found in a variety of different subspecies. So we have the northerns. So those are gonna be the blue tongues that are mainly composed of those from northern Australia. And then we have our Indonesians, and then what we also call our Halmahera. So there's three little different subspecies there. The lifespan of these guys will vary slightly, depending on if they're wild caught or captive bred. Luckily for us, most of these guys are starting to be captive bred very frequently in the hobby. But in general, for a blue tongue skink of any of the subspecies, you can expect with good care a lifespan of 20 plus years. So, as far as general care is concerned, first we'll begin with our enclosure size. So, for a blue tongue skink, in general, I recommend, even for a baby, I recommend we start out with about a 36 by 18 by 20 enclosure. So roughly you want to start with a 40-gallon breeder enclosure. That's going to be good for most of your babies up until the time they're about 16 inches long, and then you're going to want to probably move them into something larger. We generally recommend for a larger blue tongue, a 75-gallon or a 4x2x2. Those are going to be options for larger skinks. So these guys generally are pretty active in nature, so you definitely want to provide them with ample spaces to dig. They're not huge climbers, but they definitely like to spend a lot of their time out and about foraging for food, digging in their enclosure. So that extra space is definitely going to be very beneficial for these guys. As far as preferred substrate, so the substrate material we recommend here at the Tye-Dyed Iguana, we would recommend using probably our tropical mix. So that's a blended substrate. So it's gonna be pretty much bioactive ready. So it has peat moss, fir barks, long strand sphagnum. It also has activated charcoal. So these guys in nature, number one, most of them, they like a humidity range anywhere from about 40 to 80%. It does depend slightly on the subspecies, but in general, at the Tye-Dyed Iguana, we want to shoot for a humidity level that's about 60%. So in general, here at the store, we normally only have or breed Indonesians. We don't get in northerns or Australian blue tongues very often. The Australians in general tend to like it a little bit drier, but that's kind of picking hairs. So in general, 40 to 60% ideal humidity level, depending unless you have a really tropical subspecies, maybe like a Halmahera. But in general, I think 60%, most blue tongues are gonna be happy. You can easily satisfy that with having a very, rich soil bark substrate mixture that's gonna fit all your needs. Number one, it's gonna satisfy their digging requirements, but also these guys they're not quite fossorial, but they do like to dig and hide, especially in their burrows and things like that. So having that extra humidity will help in that substrate layer. As far as lighting is concerned for blue tongues, so these guys, of course, are a diurnal species. So we're gonna recommend a full spectrum UVB, UVA light source in addition to a heat source. So there's several ways you can go about this. The preferred way we usually recommend here would be either with using a mercury vapor light that's within its appropriate age range and it's regularly tested, or you can also use T5 high output lighting for UVB sources, and then we recommend an intense basking spot if you're going to do that separate bulb solution. Either one you're going to be successful with. As with any UVB source with reptiles, you want to make sure that it's always dated within the appropriate range. And when in doubt, keep in mind we do offer free testing. You can always bring your bulbs in to make sure they're still good for the appropriate enclosure you're using. As far as basking temperatures for these guys, we generally recommend a temperature of about 95 to 105 as absolute max. In the wild, these guys will experience temperatures warmer than that, but in captivity, obviously, because it's not a true wild situation, we need to keep an eye on things. So 95 to 105 is gonna be right in the pocket there. I think if you can get anywhere 95, 98, you're gonna be absolutely fine. And especially if you're using an infrared temp gun, that is definitely the most accurate way to measure temperatures. If you don't have a temp gun at home, I always recommend that. That way you can instantly measure the actual true surface temperature. That's what we care about most of the time when we're talking about basking temperatures for these guys. So 95 to 98, that's gonna be generally a good range for you as far as basking temperature. Now, as far as cool side temperatures, we generally recommend on the cool side of the enclosure to low to mid 70s, that's gonna be ideal. So anywhere from 70 to 75 on the cool side, that's gonna be good. And then as far as nighttime temperatures, as long as the room is in the 70s, you're gonna be absolutely fine. It's good for these guys' metabolic rate to have a good 10 to 15 degree temperature drop at night. Of course, obviously in the wild, it's not the same temperature all the time as well. And so these guys will experience a bit of a nighttime temperature fluctuation as well. As far as general layout of the enclosure, you do want to provide these guys with plenty of hiding opportunities. They can be somewhat secretive during the less active portions of the day, except during food time, of course. So I like to provide a hide on both the warm side and the cool side. This can be achieved either with synthetic hides. A lot of folks and a lot of keepers I know will use cork bark or grapevine hides. Those are also an excellent option. You of course want to provide a fresh water bowl. That'll be located on the cool side of the enclosure, and then the same thing with your food bowl. And then some people as well will like to provide a piece of slate or a bit of a slightly elevated basking site on the warm side of the enclosure. So in general, warm side of the enclosure, you're gonna have on one side, and then the opposite, we'll call it the cool side. Just like most reptiles, you'll have that thermal gradient. That way this guy can regulate his own body temperature, and if he feels too warm, he can always go to the cool side to cool down. We'll keep the water dish and the food bowl over there. That way they don't dry out or create excessive humidity under our heat lights. So as far as diet is concerned for blue tongues, so the diet's generally gonna be the same amongst all the subspecies. So we know these guys are what's called omnivorous. So omnivorous means they're gonna eat a big variety of different plant and vegetable material. They'll also eat a variety of different proteins. So the diet will vary slightly. So when they're very young, they're gonna eat a lot of insect proteins, things like that, in addition to fresh leafy greens, vegetables, and things like that. But when they're an adult, the mix tends to become about more 50-50. So guys like our blue tongue skink here, there's a variety of foods you can feed them, but we always recommend you want to offer fresh vegetables, collard, turnip, mustard greens, dandelions. You can do a little bit of spring mix. And then in addition to that, we'll also do yellow squash, cut up vegetables, things like that. And then as far as proteins compromised, there's really a huge variety. These guys are kind of eating machines. That makes them, in my opinion, one of the most ideal pets you can have as far as a pet lizard. So they'll eat all kinds of stuff. So they'll eat banded crickets, dubia roaches, superworms, waxworms, hornworms. They'll pretty much eat anything you can get in front of them. And especially one of our animals here, Bert, he definitely is an eating machine. He'll eat any sort of bug you put in front of him. These guys, one thing I love about them too, is that they're really easy to condition to eating prepared foods. So these guys, we also will feed them our Repashy Bluey Buffet. That's a prepared diet product. They can also eat the Repashy Grub Pie, which is like, it's basically an insect gel you can feed to them in addition to their salad. And Zoomed also makes a canned blue tongue skink and tegu food for those of you that don't want to like do any work in preparing your food. But yes, so these guys being omnivorous, there's a huge variety of foods they can eat. And generally, you'll find that your blue tongue might like one food more than the other, but in general, as with all reptiles, you want to make sure you're offering them a balanced diet. The other thing I will say is, as far as blue tongue diet is concerned, don't overdo it on the fruit. Fruit should be no more than about 5 to 10% of the diet. Just like beardies, these guys are prone to getting like gum and mouth disease, especially if they're fed a high amount of fruits, simply because it's not like us, they can't really brush their teeth. So, and all that accumulated sugar and mucus in the mouth from the fruits can cause mouth rot. So you really want to watch it on that. In fact, Eric just did a really good video on this with his blue tongue skink diet video. If you want to check out that, we'll throw a link below on that. As far as daily care is concerned for the blue tongue skink, it's going to be pretty easy. In general, you want to make sure they have fresh, clean, dechlorinated water available at all times in their water bowl. Every day, they're gonna need a fresh salad prepared, just like some of your other diurnal lizards that are omnivorous. So make sure you have those dark leafy greens in there. I also like to give them a little bit of like either some pellets or some like, some of that Bluey Buffet cut up into small pieces. And then probably on an adult, I'd throw in insects probably 2 to 3 times per week, Number one, for enrichment, but then secondarily for protein source to supplement. Of course, having the most varied diet possible is going to be absolutely ideal for these guys, simply because they just don't have the access to the variety of foods they would in the wild. And then as far as maintenance goes for the day, besides your water bowl and your feeding, of course, if they have any defecation or urates in the enclosure, you're gonna wanna go ahead and remove those, spot clean as necessary. And then me personally too, if I find that the bedding is getting really packed down or anything like that, I like to go ahead and manually stir that up and kind of fluff it back up. And then the last thing would be, I do recommend in your enclosure having a very high quality digital hygrometer, and you're also going to want to measure your enclosure's humidity daily. So if you ever have that humidity that's dropping below 50%, I'd probably end up giving them a light mist. These guys can also benefit from a soak about once a week, just for hydration. Can also help with stuck shed. But in general, you're going to want to watch your humidity levels with your hygrometer, and then you're going to spray as needed for these guys. I don't like to indiscriminately spray every day. That can lead to overly wet or stagnant conditions, so you do need to test to see where your humidity levels are at. And if you don't have a hygrometer, we do sell them here. Pick one up. It's definitely worth the money just to know exactly where your humidity levels are. Hope you guys had a great time today. If you have any questions about Blue Tongue Skinks, be sure to stop in store or drop us a message online. Have a great day.